Hey, good evening. Kathy Burris here, showing up live with some more ponderings. Um, if you hang around me, you know that that's something I do a lot. When people go through hard things, or they're anticipating hard things, there's a variety of responses to those hard things. One of them could be, okay, I'm going to use Leisha's death as an example. For my husband, he needed to get back to work, not only because he felt a need to do it, but he needed to do it. It was his way of working out the emotions that he felt, the things that he struggled with. I couldn't. I can't. I sit in those moments. I put myself in the emotion pretty deeply because I have to feel what I'm feeling. I have to figure out what this is, because it's usually a new thing, right? We've never experienced something quite like that before, and so we have to process what we're processing. Those of us that sit in the emotion and bring it close, whether we want to or not, that's just how we do it. At least that's how I do it. So here's the thing that I've been pondering, and if I go off in too many rabbit trails, I'll try to bring it back around. But there's this awareness. August 16th is the 18th anniversary of our daughter's running off to heaven, as I say, without us, and I have been, here it is 18 years later, and I'm processing deeply some of the things that have been part of this journey. And I'm very aware that who I was before that happened is part of who I am now. But I'm not the same either. I'm different. And that's good. That there's some good in that. It's not a bad thing. It's just different. And part of that, when I was young, my room was painted, wallpapered with yellow, orange, and green flowers and stripes. I mean, it was very bold, very bright. And I've had people tell me, you are yellow, you are sunshine. My husband would say, you are pumping sunshine, and that wasn't always a compliment from him. But I took it as a good thing. Pumping sunshine. I liked to be pumping sunshine. But what happens by pumping sunshine? I'm optimistic, hopeful, seeing the good in things, believing the good in things. And so even when hard things happened, I could see good in it. I could see hope. I could know, and this largely came from my parents and my upbringing, that God would always be faithful, and that he always worked things out for good, and that he had plans for a future and a hope. Those were some of my favorite verses as I was growing up. And even in some really challenging times in our life, right before Leisha died, I could say those things. I could believe those things. I could feel that belief within me. And then Leisha died. And okay, I will say, and it's been good for me to go back and read my own book, Lovely Traces of Hope, that Leisha started and I finished 10 years later. I could see, it wasn't that I couldn't see God in it. It wasn't that I wasn't looking for him. It wasn't that all of the belief system that I'd had in place wasn't part of my being able to process my grief. I had to have faith enough to look for hope. So that was all true, but there was something broken in me. And as I've pondered that, especially in this time in our world, in this time in our nation, in this time in the events that you see, if you're looking, that are fear-causing sometimes, that are uncertain, that have some chaos to them, that make you wonder what's coming next, and can produce a lot of fear and anxiety. I've been thinking about this again and recognizing that after Alicia died, there was this part of me that broke, and it was the part of me that had confidence that God was still in control, that God was still good, he was still right, he was still in control. My head could say those things, but my heart was struggling to believe them. And I was processing through being able to have confidence in God. Because if I was hurting this bad, how could this be part of all the days ordained for me, part of the future and a hope? And suddenly those verses hurt. They hurt my heart, because I thought, if God thinks this is something that's full of hope and full of future, I don't want it. Okay? I'm not saying everybody does this. This is where I had to go. I had to have some pretty hefty, and that's a mild word, wrestling matches with God. And it wasn't that he fought me. It wasn't that he scolded me. It wasn't that he shut me down. He didn't. There were those times where I crawled up into his lap and he just put his arms out so that I wouldn't fall off, and I would just yell and scream and holler and beat his chest and slap his face, and I could imagine all those things because I was so hurt and so upset. But the beauty of that moment was that when I was done with all of that, where was I? I was sitting in his lap, protected by his arms, comforted by his presence, feeling his heartbeat as I leaned against his chest, exhausted. And while Alicia's death shook me to my core, and I had to go back and learn to be again. I had to learn to crawl and walk and live again. I had to go back to ABC 1, 2, 3. Jesus loves me, this I know, basics of life, to get to the point where I could have confidence that God could still be God, still be good, still be right, still be fully in control in this situation, and I could trust him. I could have confidence in him. That took a while. In fact, as I've thought about it, the last couple of years since my mom and dad passed away, and then my health crashed, and I've just been doing everything I can do to catch my breath as I move forward, I've had to go back there again in some ways. Not the same, but I've had to go back. And it's interesting because a new friend, a friend I've known not very long, and she didn't hardly know me, but she'd heard me speak at share my testimony just briefly at an event. And I shared the ABC 1, 2, 3, Jesus loves me, this I know. And she said, you know, Kathy, in Hebrews 12, it talks about how, and I'm just unpacking this, so I'm not going to dive into the chapter, but it talks about how God shook the earth when he gave the old covenant. He shook the mountain. He shook and spoke with such power that even the people were afraid, but even Moses was terrified. And I'm reading through this, I'm going, Okay, I've read this before, but wow. But then it says, and then I will come. Okay, he's talking about a second coming. And I will shake not only earth, I will shake heaven. And I will shake it so that everything that can be shaken loose comes loose. And what you are left with is what's unshakable. Think about that. What I was left with peeled off so many layers of things that were shakeable, that could come loose. And they did. Lots of things came loose. Then and now. And yet what I'm left with is a greater awareness of who God is. A greater awareness that he can be trusted even in the midst of our seasons of fear and anxiety. He can be trusted. And that he has a future and a hope planned for us. And we can believe him when he says that. Girlfriend, I don't know where you are. I know the things that the Lord's been bringing me through the last